Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting for his freedom, he's fighting to hold on to his fortune. Forbes now estimates his net worth is $400 million, a significant drop from the $740 million valuation just a few years ago. But that number could shrink even more. Federal prosecutors are moving to seize assets tied to the alleged criminal activity, and if convicted, Combs could lose everything from luxury properties to his music rights.
Did he lose it when he disclosed that bankruptcy was ruining him and that his revenue had fallen to zero? Few in the industry ever imagined that the once impenetrable tycoon, the self-declared king of hip-hop business, and the man who made his name a billion-dollar brand would crumble like this.
A billionaire with a vodka line, a TV network, and a clothing brand, Sean Combs' fortune has taken a major hit. Forbes estimates his net worth is roughly $400 million, nearly half of what it was just a few years ago. Both his Beverly Hills and Miami mansions were raided in March of 2024 as part of the investigation into his alleged crimes. And that number may continue to drop as Combs faces a federal trial and a Justice Department forfeiture action that could cost him his empire. An empire that prosecutors allege was built, at least in part, through a pattern of criminal activity, including alleged sex trafficking, drug distribution, and violence, all used to advance what they call a racketeering enterprise. In the unsealed indictment, prosecutors outline how his business and personal assets allegedly played a role in carrying out or concealing the crimes. This means any assets connected to the behavior, even indirectly, could be seized, including real estate, companies, vehicles, and aircrafts. Now, his $60 million private jet has reportedly already been sold. The Beverly Hills estate is currently on the market for $61 million. And while Combs still owns his $48 million Miami mansion, a judge denied his request to use it as collateral for bond. In week 2 of testimony, Homeland Security Special Agent Gannon took the stand. Gannon, who helped lead the March raids of Combs' homes, walked jurors through photos of the items seized. Among them, parts of AR-15 style rifles with the serial number scratched off, loaded magazines, a Gucci bag reportedly filled with ketamine and MDMA, and personal items like lingerie and dozens of bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Prosecutors say this evidence is critical to establishing the elements required under federal racketeering laws, helping them show a pattern of alleged crime, criminal behavior used to sustain or conceal the enterprise. In an effort to protect what's left of his assets, Combs hired Stefan Casella, former deputy chief of the Justice Department's asset forfeiture and money laundering section, to fight the forfeiture action. If the jury finds Combs guilty, it will be up to them to determine how much of Combs' assets are subject to forfeiture. Anything forfeited after a conviction could be used to support alleged victims. Sean Combs denies all allegations. And to help us break down what's at stake, I'm joined by Jim Trusty. He's the former chief of the Department of Justice, Organized Crime and Gang Section. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure. Good to be here.
So, Jim, let's start with the forfeiture. This isn't just about prison time anymore. Prosecutors want his empire. From what you've seen in the filings, how aggressive is this?
Well, it looks to be very aggressive, and there's a couple of reasons I say that. The first is it's very broadly worded. What they're talking about is essentially any property, real or personal, that could constitute either facilitating property or instrumentalities, they call it, or proceeds. And so that's kind of the whole business empire of P. Diddy being at risk. And that's the second part, which is it's a RICO case, a criminal enterprise case, where they've defined the organization, the criminal enterprise, as not just Sean Combs, but as all these business interests that he has, including liquor labels, music labels, everything else you can think of. So they've set it up in a way where when they get to a forfeiture phase, if there's a conviction, the sky's the limit, and it looks like they're going to try to take a piece out of him everywhere he's ever.
Sean Diddy Combs portrayed himself for years as the epitome of success, the epitome of hard work, strength, and financial domination. He was a man who owned the media empire, the luxury automobiles, the boats, the mansions, the fashion labels, and the liquor brands. It was him who told the world, "Can't stop, won't stop," and declared himself unstoppable. However, the current situation is considerably more terrible, degrading, and dismal than even his most critical detractors could have predicted. His dominion has collapsed. According to reports, his income has completely stopped. Like a rain cloud, bankruptcy looms above him, threatening to destroy everything he's worked so hard to achieve. Additionally, Diddy is losing it and disintegrating as the reality of his financial downfall hits home. Although the fall may have seemed sudden to the public, it did not occur overnight.
Normal, though, for the government to file something so broad?
I've seen it before. I mean, in the context of racketeering cases, you tell a much more complete story in a RICO case. You don't just focus on a particular moment in time or a crime. You tell the whole story of this criminal enterprise, which lends itself to big forfeiture moments. And so it's not totally unusual to see it this broadly worded. What I think is a little unusual is it's not very specific in terms of any preliminary seizures. It looks like they haven't actually seized anything yet, even though they executed search warrants and looked for evidence of things. And so a lot of times you'll see listings in their bank accounts, automobiles, jets, whatever, that the government has already preliminarily seized to make sure it's still going to be available at the time they do a forfeiture hearing. So this one, it's a blank slate. And it's blank enough where if you're the defense attorney and you get to this next phase, which, by the way, is supposed to be with the same jury. They may not know that yet. But that second phase would be one where you really would say to the judge, I don't have any notice here, Your Honor. This is so broadly worded, I need to particularize it, have a chance to digest it, and perhaps bring in expert testimony on both sides about kind of legitimate sources of income versus illegitimate ones.
And you mentioned that, they're also linking his company. So maybe that's his, record studio, or maybe that's, his vodka line. But how does something like a vodka line, how can that potentially even be mixed up with this? How can they say that that's linked to an alleged crime?
Yeah, it's really one of two or maybe even three ways. One is if there's somehow a tie-in where that property, that business was used to facilitate the freak-offs that are in the indictment, for instance, or obstructionist behavior. So if they literally used a record studio for a party and the record studio belonged to one of his companies, you could say that actually facilitated or was an instrumentality to support the criminal conduct. The other way is essentially if it is a proceed, if it was essentially built on money that comes from illegal activity. And then thirdly, and this is where it gets really crazy confusing, so I'll keep it short, sometimes there's something called substitute assets, where the government says, okay, we realize that particular asset, that car, that piece of art, was not actually bought by proceeds or served to contribute to the crime, but because we can't find enough to satisfy the overall amount we're owed, we're going to take it as a substitute asset. It's a very government-friendly area, this whole idea of federal forfeiture. And again, I think they're in a position where they might have their mitts on almost anything he's ever touched.
And how do they decide just that number that they're looking for? Is there kind of like a flat out number that the government, when charging with these types of cases, that they say, hey, we're looking for 50 million, we're looking for 60 million. How do they decide how much?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, that is an easier task in some circumstances where you have a fraud situation where you can tell the amount of victimization and say, well, look, it adds up to 2.5 million, and they put that in the forfeiture indictment. They don't have that here. In a drug case, for instance, you might say, well, they were responsible for 10 kilograms of cocaine. A kilogram's about 30,000. So we're looking for 3 million, do the math. Here, it's much more wide open. I think you're looking at an actual trial within a trial if we get to the forfeiture phase, where there's going to be experts saying this is money that's untouched by any sort of criminal enterprise from the defense side, and maybe a forensic auditor from the FBI saying, here's why we're entitled to all these types of proceeds or instruments. So it is a wide open battlefield. It's going to be kind of a textbook example of how deep the government tries to reach for forfeiture if they get to that point.
Appeared abrupt. From the outside, Diddy's empire appeared to be unstoppable for years. However, cracks were already beginning to appear behind closed doors. Legal problems started to accumulate. Business ties became strained. Partnerships that had previously brought him millions began to fall apart. A brutal battlefield of lawsuits and broken agreements replaced his once celebrated booze brand, which had been the source of much of his riches. Hip-hop luxury in the 2000s was defined by his fashion empire, which waned to a mere shadow of its former splendor. Additionally, his media outlets, which had been heralded as the next big thing, were silenced, rendered irrelevant, and shut down. The foundation beneath the mogul's picture was already crumbling, but the image itself was still being projected. That collapse is finished now. Diddy has reportedly acknowledged in private that his sources of income have completely dried up. Nothing coming in, no income. The fact that there is no money flow at all is devastating for a man who once boasted about earning money while he slept.
At what point does that kind of strategy from prosecutors become legally risky for them, though?
You know, that's the thing. I mean, the court of public opinion every now and then turns on forfeiture. And, you know, the idea of forfeiture is that you don't want people to not just get away with crime, but profit from it. You know, being criminally prosecuted and put in prison doesn't mean that you've lost the assets. And so the idea is to kind of make things even, to hold people accountable, to not let them profit from criminal activity. But over time, you see abuses. You see situations where a person barely had a role in some sort of criminal conspiracy. I mean, literally was on the job for one day and is ordered to forfeit millions of dollars. And that bubbles up to the Supreme Court where they say this is just not totally fair. So there are abuses of the forfeiture system that are seen from time to time. I think, look, if P. Diddy, if Sean Combs is convicted in this case, I don't think he's going to necessarily gin up a ton of sympathy. But there may be legal observers that say, hey, this is a broad, overreaching moment, you know, when they try to collect every single penny. The guy who obviously had legitimate income over long periods of his life.
And for those that do say, hey, isn't this just a financial overreach? How do prosecutors justify that?
Yeah, I think they justify it by saying, in this case, they'll say, look, two things. Number one, we didn't disable him financially pre-trial. We haven't actually locked into his accounts and taken things and frozen things where it might even affect his ability to hire attorneys or hire experts. And secondly, they say, look, it's a criminal enterprise that extended for a number of years, that where he had financial profit from this kind of power and control over an enterprise. So I don't expect them to be apologetic. I mean, they may, you know, end up showing moments of moderation where they say, well, we're not going to go after this company or that company, but they've left it all on the table for now where they can do a very broad, you know, deeply reaching process if they want to.
And Sean Combs, he's already sold one jet. The Beverly Hills mansion of his is on the market for $61 million or so. Does that seem like someone who is confident that they'll walk, or could that work for or against him in court?
It's probably not going to be anything that's particularly admissible during the trial. It could come up during the forfeiture just to show that, you know, his overall stock has dropped. I mean, I think he's down to his last 400 million. It's a real tough spot to be in. But you know, but I think at the end of the day, you really can't draw any firm conclusions. He knows he's got a battle of his life going on right now. I mean, this is a life-eligible racketeering case. Doesn't mean he'll necessarily get life. It's not a mandatory sentence. But, you know, if the facts are continue to be established of years of abusive and controlling behavior, it paints a pretty dark picture for him in terms of sentencing.
And Sean Combs, he's now brought in Mr. Casella, someone who literally wrote the book on asset forfeiture. What's Casella's role likely to be here?
Well, you know, I worked with Steph at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland for years. He is literally the expert on forfeiture. Whenever I have a situation in private practice where I have a question mark about forfeiture, that poor guy has to take my phone call. So he's a great pick. He knows what he's doing. He knows both the process and the law, which can be a little bit different sometimes. I think he's probably, you know, getting them prepared for the types of challenges. And by the way, I don't know this from him, but I would guess that he's basically figuring out what are the types of challenges we could raise in a forfeiture phase. What are the deficiencies in the government's approach? In other words, are they not discounting lawful employment by Sean Combs? And frankly, some of it could even relate to like how he's spending money right now. When you have a broad forfeiture allegation, it's kind of hard to figure out, are they saying that I can't get attorneys of my choosing because I'm using proceeds of criminal activity? So I think
it is more than just a money issue. It has to do with psychology. Diddy's entire persona was based on power, wealth, and achievement. Acknowledging the loss of revenue is tantamount to acknowledging the failure of his enterprise and himself. The prospect of bankruptcy is no longer remote. It is an impending fact. This reality, according to insiders, is driving him into a downward spiral. According to reports, he has reacted angrily against people closest to him because he is upset that the empire he spent decades creating has eluded him. He is reportedly paranoid, wary of everyone around him, and desperate to escape but only seeing dead ends. He is being consumed by the shame. Bankruptcy is more than simply statistics. Diddy views bankruptcy as the demise of his reputation, the breakdown of the persona he created, and the revelation of the real Diddy. The public character of his failure exacerbates the humiliation.
These false allegations of my involvement are causing irreparable and incalculable damage to my reputation and the emotional well-being of myself and my family. I have never condoned or aided and abetted the sexual assault of anyone, nor have I ever drugged anyone. The idea that I could be accused of playing a role in or even being a bystander to the rape of anyone is beyond upsetting, disturbing, and unthinkable. That is not who I am, and my heart goes out to all the victims of sexual assault. I am confident that the allegations against me will be proven to be untrue. But for Combs, the fight is far from over. He remains in custody at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, where he awaits the next chapter in what is shaping to be one of the most explosive legal battles in music history. He has pleaded not guilty. And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Nima Rahmani. Thank you so much for coming on. Let's just dive right in. The judge denied the plaintiff's request to remain anonymous. How common is that, and what factors influence such a decision?
Kennedy, thanks for having me, and it's not common. So state law in states like New York and California, where I am, do allow victims of sex abuse to proceed anonymously. But there is no parallel federal law. It's really up to the discretion of the judge, and it comes down to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 10. And they have to balance a number of factors, including the potential harm to the victim, the sensitive nature of the allegations, any prejudice to the defendant. And I think that's the big issue here. Whether the victim has outed himself or herself. And after balancing those factors, the judge in this case came down on the side of the defense. And I think one of the reasons the judge did so is the length of time that has passed. It's very hard to defend allegations that are 30 years old, not really knowing who the complaining witness is or the victim.
And let's just talk more about this. What are the legal arguments for and against allowing alleged victims to remain anonymous in civil cases?
The argument for is that victims of sex abuse should have the right to remain anonymous. They've already been victimized, and to out them in a very public way really traumatizes them again. So that's why states do have laws like this on the books. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Now, the argument against is that the defendant has a right to due process, has a right to know who his accuser is, has a right to defend his case. And when you're a civil defendant and you've been accused of rape or sexual abuse or any type of sexual assault, it's very hard if you can't even know who your victim is. So those are the arguments on both sides, and this was apparently a close call because the judge came down on the side of the defense.
Is the dismissal a turning point in Sean Combs' defense, or just a minor victory in a much bigger fight?
It really is a minor victory, Kennedy, because this is just one of many victims who have filed civil lawsuits. Now, some victims may not want to move forward knowing that their name will be made public. And that's really what happened here. Part of this is really a defense strategy saying, hey, if you're going to sue my client, Sean Combs, we're going to out you. This may have a chilling effect.
This is not taking place behind closed doors. The entire globe is observing. All the news stories about his revenue going to nil. His reputation is harmed by every bankruptcy report that is released and every rumor about his failed companies. He thrived on attention for decades. In front of millions of people, that same spotlight is now revealing his downfall. His opponents are having a party. His detractors are blaming him, and his admirers are in disbelief. Find it hard to understand how the man who aspires to hip-hop success could now be in complete financial devastation. Diddy's detractors are taking pleasure in his suffering, particularly those who have fought against him in the past. For them, this is karma the unavoidable demise of a guy who showed off his wealth while destroying those who opposed him. Diddy, however, sees this as more than simply business. It's a personal matter. He loses the power he had for decades when he files for bankruptcy. Without money, income, or the empire, he is just another guy who will be humiliated, mocked, and destroyed.
I told it to the best of my recollection. Then she was asked again about the whole people go missing statement that she had made on Friday and even today, just as far as insinuating that people go missing just equates to a death threat. Nicole Westmoreland said, this is not the first time that you explained that incident because you sat down with prosecutors. And then that's when she started going by all these different dates. She's in 2024, Diddy had told Dawn, and this was according to the statements that she had made to federal prosecutors, that this was a passionate argument and that the defense says you didn't tell prosecutors at this time the whole where I'm from people go missing part. Then in the March 18, 2025 interview, this is, I guess, her second interview with federal prosecutors, the defense says that you didn't tell prosecutors about the whole people go missing part. Dawn says, I'm answering the questions as best I can. Then in April, she was asked about the whole egg incident again with federal prosecutors. And again, these conversations that are being had with federal prosecutors aren't with Diddy present, aren't with Diddy's defense attorneys present. And so essentially it's just Dawn and other witnesses meeting with federal prosecutors, essentially going over their statements and what their testimony could look like, that type of thing. But during this April 17th meeting, which was just a few weeks before trial, they spoke about this egg incident again. And Dawn apparently or reportedly didn't bring up this people go missing claim, and she didn't bring this claim up again until May 10th, according to the defense. So the defense was really just kind of like, you need to be honest about this. They were really just saying, why do you have to be, if you're not scared that Diddy is there and you're not scared about Diddy's threats, then why weren't you just more forthcoming with prosecutors? Why didn't you bring up these types of incidents? And so they were really just kind of getting her to kind of admit or kind of trip her up there a little bit. Then she was asked about these other incidents, such as the dinner incident with celebrities there. And that's when you start to hear the names of Neo and Usher being present at this incident. And she was asked, why didn't she mention that other celebrities were there? She really only mentioned that Diddy's employees were there. And Dawn said that she wasn't asked what celebrities were there. And so then they bring her civil claim or her civil lawsuit again and talk about how there was this incident in the civil lawsuit where Diddy allegedly dragged Cassie out of a car, but to the federal government, she was saying that this didn't happen and that she was actually misquoted from her lawyer, which I thought was kind of, a little interesting there because her lawyers are sitting inside the courtroom when this testimony is going on. And so she kind of essentially blamed that this was kind of a mischaracterization from her attorneys when they were drafting or writing up that lawsuit. Then she was asked about the Central Park Festival and the whole incident there where Diddy allegedly punched or I believe slapped Cassie in the face. And she was asked, was there a camera crew there? Because they were reportedly filming something during this, and that Dawn was quick to say that this whole incident wouldn't be on video and that they weren't actually filming in the bathroom. So whatever camera crew was present didn't capture just, I guess, the interaction between Cassie, Kalina, and Dawn Richard inside this bathroom. And so at one point I thought they were going to bring up the video inside the courtroom, but we didn't see any type of video, I guess, from this whole day or anything like that. And then she was asked, the defense said she was never alone with Diddy. There was always someone else there, like Kalina Harper. Kalina Harper, I think, kind of pretty interestingly, after Dawn Richard's suit came out, Kalina Harper kind of made this statement, or she did an interview.
And he is unable to cope with it. The truth of his breakdown is crushing him, and he is losing it both in public and privately. The repercussions are enormous. His family is now watching their father's enterprise fall apart after growing up in unthinkable luxury. His daughters, who used to accompany him on red carpets, are now witnessing him in his most frail and shattered state. Those who formerly viewed him as a sign of achievement are now struggling with the reality. The empire had always been precarious. The king has also fallen. This is more than simply a financial downfall for those who once trusted him. It is a sign being destroyed. And the devastation continues. His properties are at risk since he is bankrupt. They are depleting his finances. One by one, his businesses are failing. He is being drained by the mounting lawsuits. Additionally, Every unsuccessful recovery attempt exacerbates the situation. He will not be touched by investors. Colleagues don't want to work with him. His name has turned poisonous. At one point, he was the person that everyone wished to be beside. He is now the man that everyone is avoiding. The collapses too.
Coming forward, they may say to themselves, I don't want my sex abuse to be public, to be talked about on Law and Crime or other media outlets. So that may give some victims pause, and they may hesitate to move forward if they may have to be named by name.
Hypothetically, can the plaintiff refile her lawsuit if she later decides to reveal her identity, or is this case just permanently closed?
Hypothetically, yes, but practically speaking, no. The statute of limitations has run on a lot of these claims. There was a window that was open in New York State, then New York City. That window has now closed. So even if the dismissal was without prejudice, unless the new complaint can relate back to the old complaint, there may be a statute of limitations here. And practically speaking, when the victim made the decision not to move forward, that's probably a permanent decision. I can't see that changing.
What would you say are the biggest challenges prosecutors face when trying to prove a case with multiple accusers and decade-old allegations?
It's hard because whenever you have allegations that are old, it gives rise to the defense that they were fabricated. What you want, if you're a prosecutor, is a contemporaneous report, ideally to law enforcement or to a doctor, someone was sexually assaulted. But even if it's to a friend or a family member, something at or near the time of the assault. So the victim, when they testify, they can say, listen, I didn't want to tell my story publicly, but I at least told my friends and family members what happened. Because what will happen otherwise is the defense will say, well, this is just about money, right? This isn't about justice. These are people that are piling on, trying to shake down or extort one of the wealthiest entertainers in the world.
Could the dismissal of this case influence a jury's perception if Combs goes to trial for other charges?
The jury won't know because this is an unrelated case. Each case is going to be handled on its own. Now, obviously, the criminal case will have multiple victims because the prosecution has charged at least 3 victims, and I expect that they'll have even more victims at trial as potential prior bad acts cases. But when it comes to the civil lawsuits, they're all individual, unique cases. The jury will have to decide whether the sexual assault happened, and if it did, what the damages are. So you're not going to see civil lawsuits where multiple victims are combined or joined together in one case.
So Combs' attorneys have accused the plaintiffs of being more interested in headlines than legal merit. Do you see any indication of that in the way these lawsuits have been filed?
There are different types of victims. So some of them have been very public in their allegations, and some, like this Jane Doe, were not. So I think it's not fair or even accurate to lump all the victims together. Some have had no issue with going to the press and giving interviews, and others have wanted to remain anonymous. So it really depends on the particular victim in the case.
And we sort of touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but the lawsuit alleges events from nearly 30 years ago. How do courts typically handle cases with such a long gap between the alleged incident and the filing?
It's challenging when you have events that are this old. Any type of cold case, whether it's a criminal case or a civil lawsuit. Obviously, we're not going to have, DNA that you would have in a rape kit. We're not going to have some of
The tycoon who once controlled the hip-hop industry is now a broken man who has lost the respect, money, and authority that made him who he is. His legacy is being destroyed by bankruptcy in addition to his finances, his empire, his decades of labor, and his meticulously manicured persona. The fact that he is going to fail is erasing all of it. Diddy is unable to avoid it either. As the world watches his kingdom burn to the ground, he is ensnared in the wreckage of his own creation and is losing it. Diddy is also losing it. According to reports, he has lost his temper and is now attacking everyone around him because he is upset that his business is failing. He can't imagine living in a world without him at the top, without his name opening doors, without his wealth commanding respect. He lost the very identity he based his entire career on due to bankruptcy. The urgency is genuine. According to insiders, his enterprises are failing one by one. His accounts are emptying, and his properties are in danger. It is said that he is frantically trying to discover answers. However, each choice results in additional dead ends. He won't be touched by investors. His former collaborators have left, and the controversy surrounding
age guidance on how they walk through this process of dealing with a very broad, very deep, potentially deep-reaching forfeiture.
Since he is so knowledgeable, and since, I don't know if there's anyone who's more knowledgeable than him in this specific department, do you think that bringing him in may challenge the government's playbook at all?
I think it would certainly give them a moment of pause. Look, the reality is there's probably not a ton of time being spent worrying about forfeiture quite yet. They're probably figuring we'll get there when we get there. We got to try to get a conviction. But yeah, it's a shot across the bow. You see Steph Casello lining up on the other side, and you can say this about a lot of different type of expert witnesses and things where you say, wow, that's the king of DNA or the queen of forensic fingerprint recovery. So, I think it's a shot across the bow. They'll realize that they've got somebody that really knows their stuff on the other side, but that doesn't necessarily mean they change their approach in any way at this point.
And there's this idea of facilitating property, that a business or maybe an item helped enable a crime. How direct does that link need to be?
Yeah, we should ask Steph. Yeah, that's a great question. You have to be able to show, a significant link. It can't be just like this 6 steps removed kind of thing. Like there was a bottle of liquor that happened to be on the bar during one of these assaults, and he owns a liquor company, so therefore, the liquor, we can presume, facilitated the crime. You're going to have some, quantum of proof that's deeper than that. But it's very fact specific. And again, that's why I think you're probably looking, even though a lot of times forfeiture becomes a very small afterthought to a criminal trial, this one really has the potential to be a completely independent kind of mini trial, delving into his finances, delving into issues just like that. Like, how well connected can the government make these instrumentalities, these facilitating pieces of property? I think it's, inherently pretty difficult. But again, if you use a location, that's a little bit easier. If you say, I'm going to use my liquor company headquarters, or I'm going to use a record business studio to have one of these freak-offs, that becomes a much tougher climb for the defense to get out of it as an instrumentality. It's these kind of third time removed ones where they might have some success.
And like how you said, we're not just talking about past behavior here. Prosecutors say that this was ongoing. Does that make asset recovery just a little bit easier for them?
Yeah, in general, I'd say yes. Because you're talking about a period of years, and you're going to have, during these trials, you're going to have very specific stories from witnesses that say, I was there when X happened at this particular location. But you're probably going to get broad characterizations too. Like, he would always, use his liquor to get people drunk before these freak-offs. Or there were times where we met and discussed how we were going to do this at Office X or Home Y. Or how planes were used. It might not be a specific moment, but he might have somebody that says, I was at the airport when his private plane brought prostitutes here. So you might not have the precision that you'd have with kind of a single event trial, but you're probably going to have pretty significant stories that, again, tie these properties into the possibility of being forfeited.
How much of a role does public perception play here? Have we seen the DOJ make strategic decisions based on headlines?
Well, overall, sure. We could probably point to all sorts of cases that you could, I think, fairly characterize as a little bit of trophy hunting, where the Department of Justice or even non-federal prosecutors, think this is my great case. And they like the headlines that come with it. But look,
He is unmatched in the field. People used to beg to work with him. He is now the man that everyone is avoiding. The embarrassment goes beyond financial gain. Did he portray himself as the ultimate survivor all the time? The entrepreneur who could withstand any adversity. However, bankruptcy reveals him in ways that scandal could never. It demonstrates to the world his limitations as a person, the instability of his empire, and the transient nature of his wealth. It demonstrates that the king has fallen, not covertly, but in the open. Diddy's collapse is surprising to his fans, friends, and family. Having grown up in unthinkable luxury, His girls are now witnessing their father's collapse due to financial devastation. His followers, who had viewed him as a representation of black prosperity and achievement, are now realizing the more sinister truth that the empire was brittle from the start and that the man who built was not as untouchable as he claimed. There have been indications of tremendous devastation everywhere. One of his most successful businesses, his liquor brand, has been shut down due to unpleasant disagreements with business associates. Almost nothing remains of his fashion enterprise, which once typified hip-hop opulence. His media outlets, which were once hailed as a cultural future, have stopped talking. And whatever remains of his empire is now being drained by court battles, litigation, and settlements as legal issues keep piling up. For Diddy, bankruptcy is more than just a financial phrase. It is an embarrassment to the public. He was a man who told the world, "Can't stop, won't stop." He surrounded himself with luxury, gave million-dollar parties, and assured everyone that his empire would endure forever. All of it, however, is now crumbling before the globe. When an empire goes bankrupt, it's gone. The money is gone, and the success image he so desperately held on to is irreparably shattered. And the fallout is little more than amusement for his adversaries. His humiliation is now being reveled in by rivals who have seen him dominate for decades. Diddy's bankruptcy is more than simply a financial setback. The spectacle is open to the public. His already deteriorating legacy is further damaged by every article about his revenue plummeting, bankruptcy filing, and leaked information about his financial hardship. Those who witness his ascent find the fall nearly unfathomable. However, the reality cannot be denied. Diddy's earnings have vanished. The time for bankruptcy has arrived. And now, standing amid the ruins of his empire, the guy who was once the king of hip-hop wealth is degraded, broken, and ruined. This is not only a chapter ending. This is the empire's demise. Once a representation of untouchable prosperity, Diddy's story has been transformed into one of man ravaged by bankruptcy, deprived of everything and left with nothing but shame. Was it his knowledge of the truth that caused him to lose it? The empire has died and will never return.